science. They see an unfair playing field, metaphorically and literally speaking.
So fix the playing field, damn it. What? Don't say it's an unfair playing field, so all of a sudden the big issue is trans women taking the slot of a woman in an unfair playing field. Fix the playing field. And you know something? The day you fix that playing field, this conversation will look completely ridiculous.
Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. So I wanted to react to this podcast episode. Neil Degrasse Tyson is appearing on the show and they have a discussion about, of course, gender, women's sports, and Neil Degrasse Tyson hasn't backed down from a lot of the things he has said in the past. He's doubling down on his statements, and at some point during the podcast you're going to see that the hosts kind of talk to him like he's a 5-year-old, because this is basic. This isn't rocket science. This is basic biology. So we're going to see some of the arguments that he comes up with, and some of them are pretty shocking for a man of science, because again, this is something that a child could understand. This is something that children do understand until they're told otherwise when they get to school. And I think the way they challenge Mr. Degrasse Tyson is very impressive. So let's take a look.
One of your functions over time has been to communicate scientific knowledge to the public.
Yeah.
And that's why I was quite surprised to hear you talk about the idea that we all exist on a spectrum where you wake up one day and you feel like you're more female and more male.
The XXXY chromosomes are insufficient. Suppose no matter my chromosomes, today I feel 80% female, 20% male. I'm gonna put on makeup. I'm going to do that. Tomorrow I might feel 80% male. I'll remove the makeup and I'll wear a muscle shirt. Why do you care? Yeah. What business is it of yours to require that I fulfill your inability to think of gender on a spectrum?
Okay, so first of all, I'm glad that they're asking him to clarify what he is saying here, because maybe we got it wrong. Maybe we misinterpreted what he was trying to say. So they're going to ask for clarification, so that's good. But second of all, he's conflating biological facts with a person's choice in how they dress, in how they present themselves. So if you're stating biological fact, he's claiming that you're against people expressing themselves, people dressing how they choose to dress. Why do you care, he says. And that's quite a disingenuous approach, because you know full well like this is about people discussing biology. It's not about people discussing whether I like the fact that you're a man who wears women's clothing. We're not discussing a man being criticized for wearing makeup. That's not the core of the issue. The core of the issue is biological facts. Do they or do they not matter when we talk about gender, when we talk about sex, when we talk about the differences between men and women? We're not talking about people's choice to wear what they want to wear. So let's see what their response is.
My only point was that if who you decide is male and female in the street is a construct of style and trends and what the beauty industrial complex wants you to see, if that's how we establish gender, then maybe some people want to be fluid within that gender.
You see how passionate they speak, and I say they because I mean the woke. You see how passionately they speak about gender being on a construct, being able to choose. Today I'm going to be 20% female. Today I'm going to be 50% male. They're so passionate about speaking about that. But when it comes to race, you dare not say that race is on a spectrum. You dare not say that. They laugh and ridicule people like Rachel Dolezal. They condemn people like her. But if anything was to be on a spectrum, I would say it's more appropriate for race to be on a spectrum than gender. I'm not saying races should be on a spectrum, but I'm saying the way they respond when you talk about race being on a spectrum with disdain is a complete contrast to how they advocate for gender being on a spectrum. And to put gender on a spectrum is even more crazy than race being on a spectrum, in my opinion.
Identify. So they'll wear a skirt, but maybe have a beard, or they'll mix and match that in whatever way
Neil,
you want.
Hold on.
I'm almost done. So,
Okay.
if a person using the tools of the beauty industrial complex wants to mix and match this,
Yeah.
and they are expressing their freedom in a free country to do so, why is your job to tell them not to?
Okay.
That's my only point. And so I'm speaking of gender expression and the freedom to do so. And if you want to restrict that, then what country are we living in? Yeah, go ahead.
So first of all, I don't know a single person, and we've talked to trans people on the show. We have trans employees at TRIGGERnometry. We've spoken to all sorts of people about this issue. I do not know a single person who wants to prevent people from dressing how they want, or behaving how they want, or choosing any name that they want. However, the problem is...
So you don't... But you know such people are out there.
I'm sure such people exist in the same way that there are people who believe that the earth is flat and so on. But they're a tiny minority.
They exist.
It is
I don't know how tiny they are, given the dialogue today. But go on.
Fair.
This is why I can't have a conversation with certain people who have this mindset, because they're just intellectually dishonest. This is not what we're talking about. He knows full well that people can dress how they want to. That's not what we're talking about. So let's see how they respond. And you will see, as soon as he went on that rant, you can see the demeanor of the hosts. They begin to understand that we're not dealing with who we thought we were going to be dealing with. I think that's the impression I got, seeing their response there. So let's take a look.
Point. However, what I would say is that the conversation in the public consciousness has become prominent not between people who want to defend the right of anyone to dress how they want and the people who want to prevent that. The reason the conversation has become an issue is that we assign and allow certain privileges to people based on their sex. If you are female, you get to go to places that only other females are in, like changing rooms and toilets and so on. If you are female, you get to compete only with people of your sex because females are at a disadvantage in physical competition to males in almost every sport. In other words, we carve out certain areas where your sex matters tremendously, even though we may respect your right everywhere else to believe that you are whatever you are, to dress however you are, etc. So your claim that today you woke up and put lipstick on and grew your hair out long and tweezed out your mustache and whatever, and therefore you are female, has an impact on other people in certain contexts in which that is a problem.
You gave only two contexts. Do you have others?
Sorry, I wasn't finished. And in those contexts, it is essential, people would argue, to protect women from unfair competition and from various risks for which female-only spaces already exist. That's why people are having this conversation. Okay. It's not out of bigotry.
Do you have more than those two examples? And I'll address each of those in turn. But do you have more than those two?
And here comes the deflection. 2 examples are more than enough, because this is women's sports that is at stake here. I mean, women's sports being destroyed, that would be a pretty big deal. That alone is enough reason to address this foolishness. And then women's spaces, again, women's bathrooms, women's locker rooms, women's sororities. We've seen plenty of examples of women's spaces being infringed upon. So again, he's fixating on, give me more examples because it's just another deflection. That's why it's hard to have this conversation with certain people. It really is.
Probably not. Okay. So let me address those 2 examples directly. I'll address them.
Sports is very important.
You said that.
Female-only spaces.
I remembered. So, but you don't seem to have a third example. So
I'm about to give you one.
And even if you do, we presume that would be a very distant third compared to those 2 cases. Right.
No, there's a third one I can give you very easily. In this country, for politics, we have female-only shortlists for positions in Parliament. Therefore,
I didn't know about that. That's interesting. Okay.
Well, that's another example. I can give you more. So, female-only shortlists, there are certain targets within corporations for diversity targets to have a certain number of women on the board. Therefore, when you make a claim that you are female, you are attempting, whether intentionally or not, to insert yourself into categories that are deliberately designed to protect women's interests.
Yeah, we saw the example with women's pageants. People might say, well, that's just a pageant, who cares? But some of these pageants come with scholarships. So when a male comes along and wins just because they're male, not because they're held to the same standard as the women, if you look at some of these examples, you will see that they're not. And, the organization wants the virtual signal and the male gets the scholarship. So these are women missing out on scholarships. It's affecting opportunities.
That is the concern that people have. So there's 4 examples for you there. Please address them.
Sure. So interesting about the parliament. I have to look into that to find out what is it try to ensure the representation of women? Is that the goal?
That's correct.
Yes,
okay,
correct.
fine. So it's a perfectly noble cause there. So about personal changing spaces, okay? That's a solvable problem, of course. And we basically have accomplished that here in Manhattan, where I live. Practically all bathrooms are either multi-gender or solo bathrooms, so only one person at a time, or you walk into a space and there's stalls that are closed off, but then you exit the stall and you come to a communal sink, okay?
Yes.
So it's a solvable problem where everyone has a private space rather than, for themselves, rather than having a gender private space, okay? It's solvable.
The single stool bathrooms, fine. But he's failing to recognize that not everybody's comfortable with mixed bathrooms. I spoke about when I went to Seattle, went into a mixed bathroom, first time ever going into such a bathroom. And a lot of people were commenting on my Twitter, speaking about how they are uncomfortable with that. That shouldn't be the only option. Women's bathrooms should still exist, and they do still exist. So that's New York. But everywhere else, most other places, bathrooms are still categorized. And some people don't feel comfortable with a man being in the stool next to them. Some women don't feel comfortable with that. For some women, it could be triggering. I didn't even know it was a mixed bathroom until, a guy held the door open for me. I thought it was going to be a single stool bathroom, and then I saw cubicles, and I was like, oh, it would be a shame if we got rid of male and female bathrooms. It really would. If we got rid of that, permanently, so there's no choice. When you're going to certain places now, it's just the bathroom is mixed. And again, that provides a door for predators, because now there's no clear separation of men and women when it comes to the bathroom. The men and the women, yes, the cubicles are separate, but that doesn't matter. The man can go into the bathroom, no questions asked. He's allowed to go in there now because it's a mixed, bathroom. So obviously that's going to allow men to go into the same bathroom as women without being questioned. And it's always going to be an issue because, okay, that could just be a bathroom in a restaurant, a bar, a cafe or something. But what about bathrooms in gyms? Are we going to now say, everyone can be in the same locker room? There's always going to be a need to have separate categories, whether you like it or not. There's always going to be a need for that. So it's not going to take away the issue. We think about more intimate spaces like locker rooms. I'm sorry, you can't say to accommodate 1% of the population, we now need to just have no, genderless locker rooms. That is not wise. And we're not just talking about adults here. Children go into these communal spaces too. Young girls, young boys go into these communal spaces. So we have to really ask the questions. Are we putting people at unnecessary risk? I would like the US to go down the same route as the UK when it comes to policies on new buildings. Each new building in the UK now has to have a designated male and female bathroom. Very simple.
Okay. So I remember boys' rooms where you come out and, you whip it out and we'd all be peeing into a trough. Okay. We don't have those anymore.
We do because we're technologically very far behind.
Yeah.
Okay. So and then we had urinals just lined up on a wall that was a little more private. And now those urinals have little small but real dividers. So you're not like looking over. So there are solutions to the privacy problem, and we've all but solved that here. I can't speak for every state in the United States. Definitely here in New York City.
So these two podcasters, they're over in the UK. One of them is a satirist. Then you would think, watching this now, that this was a whole satire setup. You would think. I don't think it is, though. I think he's being serious. If you're for women's sports and you believe that male and females should be kept separate, he's going to give an example of a woman who had high testosterone. And he thinks that proves his point. But what it actually does, it shows how ridiculous it is to allow a male to compete in women's sports when women themselves have their testosterone checked and, are penalized for having naturally occurring high testosterone. Now, I think he's bringing up this example to say, that women could have varying degrees of testosterone. So what does it matter? But no, in fact, it actually proves that it matters when it's women, but when it's a man who wants to identify as a woman, for some reason, it no longer matters. That doesn't make sense. That's hypocrisy. So let's take a look at the example that he gives. Second,
with sports, very interesting. There was a case where a woman wanted to be they wanted to disqualify her from an event. And she had very big muscles and she had naturally high testosterone levels. Okay. She was genetically female, but unusually high testosterone levels. And so that weirded everybody out. So I'm wondering whether the future of those sports is you don't contest gender with gender. You contest hormone ratios.
Well, hold on a second.
What
but
do you think of
the differences physiologically between men and women are not just hormonal. Women have a different hip angle. They have different heart capacity. They have different lung capacity. I mean, there are profound physiological differences, different bone density. We've had professional athletes on the show to talk about it.
And the point he made doesn't give weight to his argument. It shows that women get penalized when their testosterone is too high, but the males get special treatment for some reason. And like he's saying, it's not just hormones, it's muscle mass, it's height, it's speed. Men are naturally faster than women. I mean, we've seen the high school boys' record for 100 meters. It's faster than the women's world record. Grown woman's world record is not as fast as the high school boys' world record for 100 meters. That's just one example. So there are clear differences between men and women. Even if a woman has high testosterone naturally, she's still a woman. But yet, she will get penalized for having high testosterone. She will get disqualified. Even though she's taken no, exogenous testosterone, she will still get penalized.
I don't have a problem with that. Then you find ways to slice the population so that whatever the event is interestingly contested. So, for example, I wrestled in my life. I was captain of my high school wrestling team. It would be unfair for me at 190 pounds, which is what I was back then, to wrestle someone 120 pounds.
Hold on. It would actually be unfair for you to wrestle someone who's also 190 pounds but female.
Let me work my way there. Let me just work my way there because
fine.
You are.
Conveniently
I
ignores that point.
how active your brain is, but I've thought about all this and just allow me to speak it at the rate that I do. Okay.
Go for it.
So it would be unfair. So they have in wrestling. They said, let's make weight categories. Okay. So we make weight categories. So I don't wrestle the 120. I wrestle 190 pounder. So a wrestling match is not just this one person against the other person. It's 10 matches. And each one is intensely interesting because they are matched. Okay? So.
Wow. This is insane. So you can literally acknowledge that sports can be unfair when you put people who are in different categories naturally together. He can acknowledge that. But he can't acknowledge that with male and female categories. That's why we have those categories. Those categories exist. Newsflash. For the same reason we have heavyweights and lightweights not fighting each other. Nobody wants to see that. Nobody wants to see a 250 pound, 6'4" guy fight a 5'7" man who's 150 pounds in a boxing match. Nobody wants to see that because the lightweight guy will get demolished. Not because he's not a good boxer, but because he doesn't have the same physical advantage. So they put the people with the same physical characteristics, naturally occurring physical characteristics, in the same fight. And it's more entertaining that way because then they're on an even playing field. Everything he's saying is ridiculous because even if you did do that, even if you looked at hormone levels and, you know, muscle mass and all of that, height, that would still predominantly put women in one category and predominantly have men in another category because we are different from men. 99.9% of women will therefore compete against each other, and 99.9% of men would compete against each other. The trans athletes that he's advocating for, if we were to apply his logic, they wouldn't be competing against female athletes because they would be put in another category. What he's saying is just, it isn't rooted in reality. And even if it was applied, that would automatically, by default, separate the sexes. So you could acknowledge fairness when it comes to weight, but you can't acknowledge fairness when it comes to male and female.
What the trans conversation is foisting upon us is the need to find ways to slice the athletic universe such that we still have interesting fair matches. And is it a combination of, did you go through puberty as a male and then transition? Did you have puberty blockers? What is your hormone level now if you want to compete? So it requires more creative thought. Rather than saying no to it all, let's be creative about this as we were with wrestling, as we are with practically any other sport. In rowing, there's a heavyweight rowing and there's lightweight rowing. They don't compete against each other. Somebody came up with that to resolve the problem because more than one category of person wanted to compete. So I agree with you, it's an unsolved problem, yes, but it's not unsolvable.
Like, what is this? We have it figured out. Men and women being separated in sports. It's not a new phenomenon. It's not a problem. We've already solved the issue to make sports fair. And what's happening now is people wanting to infringe upon that. And that's what we're fighting for, to stop the madness. And I'm sorry, but this is an example of that madness unfolding before our very eyes.
Given what we know about human physiology. So why not rise to that occasion and solve it rather than take your older view of the world and force modern emergent conduct of people to fit that?
Okay, well, can we just come back to the female shortlist and other opportunities that women are afforded by virtue of being women? And them now being excluded from that because males are entering that competition.
Yeah, so a deeper problem, thank you for bringing that up. A deeper problem there is, why were women underrepresented to begin with? What kind of bias exists within Parliament or among the voters, maybe even the female voters, that prevented the representation from being there in the first place? That's a whole other social question that maybe can and should be answered at a deeper level than a quota coming in after the fact.
Oh, I'm not a fan of quotas, but if they exist...
That's how I would address that question.
Hold on a second. That's not addressing the question at all. The question is, female shortlist exists. Should biological males be allowed to enter those female shortlists? That's as simple
the question.
As the question is.
Yeah, I'm saying I would ask why you have the short list in the first place. It's because there's something deeper that's wrong with society, that women are underrepresented in governance.
So I will, once again, deflect. We're talking about race now. You will go on and on about how it's unfair that Rachel Dolezal got a spot at HBCU that should have gone to a black person. You could talk about that all day, though. So he's asking you in the same way that Rachel Dolezal took a spot from a black person, while posing as a black person, to get into a HBCU and a scholarship and all of that. Is it okay for a male to do the same thing for a spot that is reserved for a female? And he won't answer. All he's going to do is deflect and say, well, why weren't they, represented in the first place? Very, very frustrating conversation to have. Very, very frustrating conversation to observe. The two hosts, they're doing a great job. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't. This is why I don't talk to people with this mentality. Because no matter what you say, no matter what logic you present, they don't care. This is what they want to push. This is their religion. This is their cult that they've sold out to, even if it makes them look ridiculous. They don't care. The best they will do is deflect.
So to say now, to protect that now and not try to get to the root of that problem, I think is the cart in front of the horse. So I would go deeper to that problem. So
but
you
there
don't
are
even have to have
women
that question.
whose opportunities are being curtailed today because they are being forced to compete, whether in sports or elsewhere, against people who have some kind of advantage over them.
We're in a transitional period, so we have to figure that out. But the way to figure out things that require solutions to progressive change is not to regress it to how things once were. If that were the case, I would still be drinking from a segregated water fountain. Okay? Oh, let's merge the water fountains and let's create the opportunities from below so that we don't even need the short list. Okay? That's how I would approach this. So yeah, we're in the middle of solving that problem now. Let's figure it out together.
I think a lot of people would have an issue with what you're saying, Neil, is because they see women being denied opportunities. They see an unfair playing field, metaphorically and literally speaking.
So fix the playing field, damn it. What? Don't say it's an unfair playing field, so all of a sudden the big issue is trans women taking the slot of a woman in an unfair playing field. Fix the playing field. And you know something? The day you fix that playing field, this conversation will look completely ridiculous. That's what I'm trying to tell you.
It does look completely ridiculous. And I'm sorry to say, you're the one who's been completely ridiculous. You're a scientist and you're failing to acknowledge scientific fact. And you notice how convenient it is when they want to bring race into something as an example. So this is the same as segregation, basically. When it's convenient, race applies. But when you talk about race being on a spectrum, in the same way you're trying to put gender on a spectrum, it's laughable. It's ridiculous to say that someone could identify as a race that they choose to identify as. That's ridiculous. Then when it's convenient, they bring in race as if to compare the two things. So now this is segregation, male and females not being able to compete against each other. He's worried about this conversation looking ridiculous. It's not going to look ridiculous in a few years' time, any more ridiculous than it looks now. All of these type of conversations end up looking ridiculous when someone tries to argue that men and women aren't different. When someone tries to argue that it's not fair, for a 190-pound person to wrestle against a guy who's 120 pounds. But it's fair for a man to compete against a woman. That's fair though, because we have to, validate somebody's gender. So it doesn't matter what biology says. So interesting conversation, ridiculous conversation. And yeah, I thought the hosts, they did a good job. They did what they could with what they were presented with. As far as I'm concerned, he knows exactly what he's doing because I know he's a smart guy. Clearly, he's smarter than I am. He's an astrophysicist. So I know he's a smart guy. He knows what he's doing. He's pushing an agenda. And if this is what you have to do to push an agenda and be on the right side of woke, count me out. This guy seems perfectly happy for women's sports to be erased. He seems perfectly happy with that. Kind of sounds misogynistic to me. So let me know what you think. Thanks for watching. Take care of yourselves and God willing, I will see you in the next video.